I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. Governors veto bills all the time. But Maryland Governor Westmore's vetoes last week of the reparations study bill and several environment bills, despite their low budget impact, has angered some of his closest allies. The General Assembly's Black Caucus, the largest Black caucus of any state, and the region's environmental groups, who were a pillar of the More Alliance that brought him to power in 2022. The governor and his new discontents have both made substantive policy arguments for and against the vetoes. But it is a truth about the intertwined nature of policy and politics that policy without politics is like painting a picture of the sky without any blue. The governor is not going to be seriously challenged from the left. His challenger is going to come from the Republican Party. There are rumors that former Governor Larry Hogan might be back. It's a big maybe. With Trump in the White House, Maryland Democrats are likely to have their tails up. So where do environmentalists and Black voters go? To get to the policy and the politics, I spoke with Maryland Senator Charles Sydnor of Baltimore County, Mike Tidwell of Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and Seth Grimes, a bike and pedestrian safety advocate. I should add that these interviews are in sequence and my guests are not part of a single panel. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
We don't listen to each other. I gather all my evidence, filtered by allegiances, but does it make a difference? We all came wanting connection, side by side and hand to hand. We are driven to understand until we're convinced that the other's just too different.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Frederick, Maryland-based country folk singer-songwriter Susanna Laird. On the songs we play, she's playing the guitar and the piano as well. You can find her music on YouTube at Susanna Laird.
Smiles and human touch. Now we choose the anonymous, qualify for judgment, and make enemies of all of us. I can't take any more. I never wanted a war. I miss happiness when I used to believe that people try their best.
Charles Sydnor, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Glad to be back.
Governor Moore last Friday vetoed a reparations study bill. What was the bill about?
The creation of a commission to study government, corporate, and other action from emancipation up through 1965. It would have empaneled experts to study and look at the generational harms that were committed upon the Black community and come up with recommendations as to how to repair the harm.
What did the governor say in his veto?
He said that it was now time for action because this had been studied for years. The reality is there has never been a study on reparations in this state. This legislation was new in that respect. Last summer, no one had ever said that there were studies that were done. Otherwise, we would have probably just looked at what had been done. But the reports and the studies and things that they were talking about, one, which was published in 1999, was called the Task Force to Study the History and Legacy of Slavery in Maryland. That's a history report. That's not a repair or reparations report. This is looking at acts that were taken, especially things that were held up and supported by this state government. And you look at all of this and you say, okay, how do you repair that damage that was done? That is not what these reports were about.
Is the issue here that a catalog of repair that the commission would produce, would that be too expensive to meet?
The commission in and of itself was, I think the fiscal note said it may have been about $50,000 or just around per year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would have lasted or done its work for just over 2 years. You're not talking about a lot of money.
Yes, even though the fiscal note says it's $50,000, $60,000 in 26 and another 60,000 in 27, the list of damages that it would produce would then make it incumbent on the state and the state government to repair that damage. And so that repair would be astronomical. Is that an expectation?
Yeah, it probably would be, but we have not gotten there yet.
But once you create the list, you have to do something about it. If you don't create the list, then you don't do it.
In other words, hear no evil, see no evil, then you don't have to respond. The argument for reparations isn't new. As early as the late 1800s, people have been asking for this. People have been organizing around this, and the country and the states, they have never done the right thing.
Legislature just went through this year with child abuse.
Absolutely. And you saw what happened, right?
Yeah, so the original law was too expensive.
And what did we do?
Then you had to curtail it, right?
That's what happened. That's exactly which is why, again, I'm saying I don't think anyone is in the business of attempting to bankrupt this state. All of those things would be your realities. We have to balance a budget at the end of every session. So again, under those constraints, the question would be, what does repair look like? And I can sit here today and say, I don't know what the answer is. That's why we were going to pull together these experts to really look at this, to try to work this stuff out.
The Maryland State Archives, where this endeavor would be housed, has also said that they don't have the resources to house such an effort.
That's news to me. I hadn't heard that.
It's in the fiscal note.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. And even if that was the case, I'm sure we would certainly make certain that they had whatever resources that they needed.
So what is the path forward now?
If you're talking a veto override at the next session, I'm supportive of that. And I would say most of the colleagues that I've spoken to are supportive.
There's talk of having an October session because of fiscal reasons. Would you consider a veto then, or would you wait for January?
I believe that when it comes to vetoes, you have to take them up at the next session. So if there were a session in October, I think we'd have to take it up then.
Are you particularly disappointed that this is Maryland's first Black governor, very popular, and the veto comes from him?
What you're pointing to is, as you said, he's the first Black governor of this state, and he is the sole Black governor in these United States.
That's correct.
So there's some symbolism there.
Did you have indication that he would be vetoing?
You know what? Yes. You had indications that he was not comfortable with this topic.
Do you understand why?
Not in my seat. I do not.
So he's going to run for re-election next year. Do you think running against a reparation study helps him moderate in the eyes of the electorate?
In the eyes of the white electorate? Is that what you're asking?
I didn't say white. I said electorate.
No, I've heard conversations that the reparations is not popular, but the question is not popular for who? It's had a real strong base of support within the Black community and amongst many Black leaders. And they're taking note. I mean, you can look, there was an article that was just published in the Baltimore Sun, a representative in South Carolina that has sought their parties to disinvite him to be the speaker at their Democratic Party because of this.
But is he using this to move to the middle, you think?
Oh, yeah, I do. I guess the question is, at what cost?
The Black community is unlikely to defect from Governor Moore. Their choices are limited.
That may be a part of the calculation that he's making. Where do you have to go? But again, I think it's dangerous when people feel as if their vote is being taken for granted. And that's some of what I'm hearing out in the public when you have conversations about this. On my social media pages, in response to my saying, I look forward to a veto override. Most of the people who have been supportive of the governor's actions are saying, we're supportive that he did this, but we're still not going to vote for him anyway. So the governor, I think, is going to have to deal with issues that are much larger than a reparations commission bill, not a reparations bill, but a reparations commission bill. They're going to have to deal with the budget that we just passed. We're going to have to deal with the public sentiment around some of the fees and taxes that have been adjusted. And given some of the talk about who will be the Republican candidate running, he would not be running against a Dan Cox kind of candidate next go around. So you're talking about a very different race. Maybe that goes into his calculation. But again, if people feel that their support has been taken for granted, no one's saying that they're going to vote for the Republican, but will they come out as they did before? I hope for his benefit that it's not a miscalculation.
Maryland Senator Charles Sidnor, thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Tidwell, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Governor Moore vetoed a bunch of climate-related bills. What are they? What do they do? Please explain.
Well, the governor vetoed a lot of bills on a lot of topics, two of which are definitely related to climate. The most important of which is the Renew Act, which is a bill that would simply have Maryland follow states like New York and Vermont that have already passed quote unquote Superfund bills for the climate. These are bills that use Superfund federal laws that basically declare that instead of creating a toxic Superfund site on the ground, the oil companies knowingly created a toxic Superfund site in the atmosphere by dumping CO2 into the atmosphere. Therefore, they have to pay for their damages. They knew or should have known that this would be a consequence of their product. They did it anyway. And now New York and Vermont have passed laws to assess fees in the billions of dollars. Now, in Maryland, we tried to pass a similar law called the Renew Act. And the General Assembly said, well, no, let's cut this bill in two. Let's do a study first, have the study delivered, tell us how many billions of dollars climate change is costing the state. And then in 2020, and that study will be due in December 2026. And then in 2027, the legislators told us, we'll come back, we'll look at those numbers, and then we'll consider whether to implement the fees like New York and Vermont. So it's a study bill. That's all it is. It's a bill that says we're going to take $500,000, give it to the comptroller's office, and have her office, using publicly available data, collect just how damaging climate change is to the state. How much are we already spending on sea level rise adaptation, saltification of farmland, loss of roads in downtown areas like Ellicott City? What's it costing us? And come up with a number. It's going to be in the billions of dollars, but the governor vetoed a study bill. He also vetoed a bill that would study the impacts of data centers on our energy use and on ratepayers and on the environment. So this was profoundly disappointing that he would do this.
He also vetoed a bill on resource planning for the energy sector.
Yes, he did. So this would be a bill sponsored by Senator Katie Hester of Howard County that just says, look, PJM, the regional grid operators, the people who manage the grid and transmission and try to keep the lights on, have wildly mismanaged the grid. We now have skyrocketing prices. We don't have enough wind and solar projects in the queue. They've been bottled up. They've done a terrible job. That is basically the universal impression of these regional grid planners. So Katie Hester's bill would say, look, Maryland's got to start doing its own planning. We can't rely on these regulators outside the state to do this. A very reasonable bill. How would we do this? How can we study? How can we plan? And the governor vetoed that.
What is the governor's logic in vetoing these three bills?
His stated reason was that there were too many study bills, and study bills like the Renew Act study bill just distract the agencies, and the agencies are trying to get their jobs done anyway, and this costs money, and we got to tighten our belts. It's ridiculous. $500,000 for the Renew Act study bill is a rounding error compared to the rest of the budget. And I will just say that the Republican governor of Vermont did not veto a bill that was not just a study bill, it was a study bill and an assessment of fees. So it was the full bill. He didn't veto the bill. And now you have a Democratic governor in a blue state with 3,000 miles of tidal shoreline vetoing it. It's a harm to Maryland. But what Governor Moore needs to understand is this is a harm to all the states trying to pass bills like this, like Virginia and DC and New Jersey, who are trying to protect their ratepayers. So when the governor says, it's a fiscal issue, that just makes no sense. It's a ridiculous argument. What it is in terms of a fiscal issue is the governor has to answer the question. These impacts are happening. Billions of dollars of impacts are happening to Maryland from climate change. No one disputes that. The study will eventually, when we override this veto, confirm that. So the governor has to decide, does he want taxpayers in Maryland to pay billions of dollars to repair the roads and the bridges and to help farmers and to help schools get better air conditioning and all these costs? Or does he want the people who cause the problem, the biggest oil companies in the world, to pay? It's one or the other. There's not a third choice. It's either taxpayers or the oil companies. And here the governor won't even study it. He won't even study the issue.
Well, if he studies it, and that impact is actually cataloged, then he'd have to do something about it. One way to manage the large fiscal impact and anger the moderate and on the right, and maybe even corporations, is to put this off for a little while.
That's too bad, because he's harming people. He's harming families. He's harming farmers. If his personal politics are more important than the welfare of Maryland families, then that's sad.
But if he's not elected, then it'll be sadder, right? The question maybe is, are you able to break from him in an electoral sense? Or is he better off moderating his position such that he has a better chance for re-election than coming back to it?
I think the governor should govern on principles. Yes, politics are involved, but this was such an easy lift. This was such low-hanging fruit. This was a $500,000 study, which will show that ratepayers should not pay billions. In other words, this could lead, yes, Governor, it could lead to a situation where the General Assembly passes a bill that you will again have to decide whether to sign or veto, that will actually save taxpayers billions of dollars in the state. He should run on that, and stand up to the fossil fuel corporations. I think it's polling all over this country, Republicans, Democrats, urban, rural, all voters show they agree that fossil fuel companies, when they create a mess, they should clean it up. It's one of the best polling environmental issues in the history of polling. And I wish the governor would take a look at that and stop being afraid of whatever he's afraid of and start focusing on protecting Maryland families.
Politics is a consequentialist endeavor. If you don't win, you can't change anything. Is the environmental community now in a position where it will actually break with the governor and there will be political consequences of that?
I would take that same question and ask the governor, because he has broken with the environmental community on this issue. And does he see consequences in that? Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he takes us for granted. Here's what we know. There was a study in the last 2 years that showed that just dealing with sea level rise, just building the sea walls required to protect Maryland from the coming several feet of sea level rise will cost $27 billion. That's publicly available data, $27 billion just for sea level rise. That's not counting the tornadoes. That's not counting floods like in Ellicott City. So the governor has vetoed a study bill. He has broken with the environmental community on this. He has upset, understandably, the League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, and Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And we're hoping that he will work to repair that. That it's not a matter of, hey, can we deal with this? Because if you don't win an election, you can't govern. We believe you can govern on these winning issues. And the governor got bad advice. He was told to veto a bill he should never have vetoed. It has caused a rift in environmental politics in the state that are harmful to him. And we're hoping that he can work to repair that, because there was a lot of goodwill toward the governor when he ran. He had a lot of support from the environmental community. And now we're just wondering, what have we gotten from that? He has signed some good climate bills that he didn't lead on. The General Assembly sent it to him, but he signed it. I will say, I think what's positive about the governor is he did not jump on the pro-gas bandwagon that the Senate president and the speaker seemed to jump on early in the session, and they moderated their views. In the final bill that we got, called the Next Generation Energy Act, I don't think will incentivize any gas plant construction.
But he is signing that bill, right?
He signed that bill, and it incentivizes a lot of battery storage and solar siting, and it phases out trash incineration in Baltimore. It's a good bill. I will say, though, that the governor never stood with the leadership in proposing gas plants in the state. His bill, Energize Maryland, which is a pro-nuclear bill, did not have anything on gas. So I give the governor credit that he's not pro-gas, but he needs to be pro-climate. And he needs to start figuring out how we're going to protect ourselves from the inevitable billions of dollars of impacts that are coming.
What does repair look like to you?
I mean, we'd love to sit down with the governor and say, here are our priorities. Our top priority is to pass the Renew Act.
So next year,
we're going to override his veto. That's for sure. We have the votes. It'll either happen in a special session in September or it'll happen in January. Then we would like to secure his vote for the full bill when we come back in 2027, assuming he's reelected, to assess the fees on the oil companies, just as Vermont has done with a Republican governor and New York has done. And then, yes, there's a lot more. We need to do more on decarbonizing buildings. The governor's also issued an executive order weakening our clean cars bill, basically saying penalties for dealerships not meeting the state law of having a sufficient number of electric vehicles. The governor's walked that back. So it's just been disappointing on almost every front. The governor so far has been average to not good on the climate. And this is what people will remember 10 and 20 and 30 years from now. That's the other message we'd like to hopefully get the governor to understand. Whatever it is we're doing right now, it is the climate that people in Crisfield and Ocean City and Ellicott City and Baltimore, they're going to have so many impacts from climate change. And they're going to look back at 2025 and say, wait a minute, the governor then vetoed a bill just to study this? surely the governor doesn't want that to be his legacy. He doesn't want to be remembered for that by future generations. And we want to work with him to have him remembered by future generations for more wind power, more solar power, more clean cars, and adaptation, having the polluters who made the mess pay for it.
There is talk about Larry Hogan coming back to run for governor again. The environmental community, would it vote for Larry Hogan out of, upset?
Larry Hogan was terrible on climate. And if he's ever reelected, he'll be terrible again. He will empower the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. I think Maryland voters know that. They showed that when they voted for Angela Alsobrooks for U.S. Senate. It wasn't even close, that race. I think that Larry Hogan running in Trump phase 2 will experience the same consequences and results that he saw running against Angela Alsobrooks.
So Governor Moore is moderating. He's going to the middle in order to be reelected. Why is that not a fair position?
Because there's nothing of moderation that's happening on climate change in our state. I just published a book about the conspicuous impacts of climate change on my street. Every street in Maryland is experiencing some kind of extreme weather consequences: too wet, too cold, too dry, too hot, people sick, plants sick, flooding. And so what is moderation in that setting? I think that, again, polling shows that clean energy polls extremely well in this state. And the concept of polluters paying for the messes they make polls really well. I encourage every listener to Google that issue, polling data, polluters pay, clean up your mess. And the governor would find that this is a winning political issue for him, even if he's trying to tack to the middle, whatever his future ambitions, whatever strategy he thinks will get him reelected or elected in future office. He needs to understand that these are winning issues for him.
Mike Tidwell, Executive Director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Thank you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Fill up his fragile skin.
Seth Grimes, welcome to I Hate Politics. Governor Moore just vetoed a bill on sidewalks and bike paths, House Bill 628. What did the bill say?
I'm quoting here, requiring the State Highway Administration to prioritize funding for the construction and reconstruction of sidewalks and bicycle pathways to ones that are adjacent to highways that are within a complete streets policy or another similar Vision Zero program, and so on.
Can you put that in plain speak?
Sure. Complete streets policy, and the Maryland Department of Transportation under Governor Moore enacted one just last year universally. Ensure that our streets, our roads, our highways in Maryland are safe for all road users, that as appropriate, they contain facilities not only for motor vehicle operators, but also transit, bicycling, pedestrians, walking. Complete streets doesn't mean you're going to stick a bike path on an Interstate 95 or the Beltway, but it does mean that you're going to create them on streets that can support them along with sidewalks. Vision Zero is a commitment that the state of Maryland and many localities have made to reducing the number of traffic fatalities and serious injuries to zero. We have made excruciatingly slow progress on realizing Vision Zero. Therefore, legislators are trying to find ways to accelerate our progress. House Bill 628 that the governor vetoed aspires to be part of progress toward accomplishing Vision Zero and implementing complete streets policies, aspires to it.
How does it do that?
Well, it creates a requirement, a mandate for the State Highway Administration, which controls state highways. Those are any numbered road in the state. I'm not talking about 7th Street. I'm talking about Route 410 or Route 650, which is East-West Highway and New Hampshire Avenue, Montgomery County, and so on. Requires the State Highway Administration to prioritize funding in certain ways. Now, I do observe that this bill does not add new funding. It doesn't create any new programs. It doesn't allocate new staff to bicycle pathways, sidewalks, complete streets, or Vision Zero. It is a bill that prioritizes funding, and that means that it imposes a administrative burden on the State Highway Administration, an administrative burden to essentially do what they're already doing in different ways. This would essentially be redundant, as the governor said in his veto letter, forcing them to do additional evaluations that are going to be redundant to the ones that they're already doing.
Were they bills that would have made substantive changes that did not pass? Bills related to pedestrian and bike safety.
For instance, there's a bill that was introduced and passed the Montgomery County House delegation that would allow the county to reduce the speed limits on its own streets, not the state streets, the county-owned streets, in Montgomery County to 15 miles an hour without doing an engineering and traffic investigation. We are discussing complete streets policy. Montgomery County has a complete streets policy that extends to creating a typology for every county-owned street. That typology means it's residential, it's a commercial connector, it's a highway, and so on. And the county authorities determined what the appropriate speed should be on each of those types of streets. Therefore, requiring an engineering and traffic investigation to reduce the speed limit is redundant to what the county has already done. But that bill didn't pass the Senate, didn't even get a vote in the Senate committee. Bill was introduced this year by Delegate Michelle Guyton in Baltimore County and Senator Anthony Muse in Prince George's County that would have prohibited stopping, standing, or parking in a bike lane. So when a vehicle is obstructing a bike lane, then a bicyclist is forced into the traffic lanes. Often we have traffic lanes on some of the roads in Montgomery, Prince George's County, bike lanes, I should say, where the speed limit is 45 miles an hour. Forcing a bicycle rider out of the bike lane into those lanes is dangerous. It also impedes traffic. That bill had a bad amendment, a well-intentioned but bad amendment that would have allowed delivery trucks to park in a bike lane for half an hour. And that's a simply unacceptable compromise in safety. So that's a bill that didn't advance. And, many bills take several years before you can answer all of the arguments, you can create the amendments necessary to reach consensus and pass a bill.
If a delivery truck has to deliver something and there is a bike lane, where should they park in your view?
The best solutions for creating road safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, I mentioned speed limit reduction, lower speeds. It's also to create protected infrastructure. But part of creating safe infrastructure should be to create loading zones where needed, and by creating off-street loading areas for businesses.
What particular changes are you hoping for in the coming session? I know it's the last one just ended.
So I will say we did have some big wins for the bicycling advocates, for safe streets advocates this session. The Maryland Department of Transportation initially cut funds from the state's Complete Streets program. They reduced the funding, my recollection was by about 9%. And then they were able to actually increase the funding over last year. They more than restored the cuts from their draft of the Transportation Improvement Program to what they enacted. They actually boosted funding for what's called the Kim Lamphere Bikeways Network programs. It provides funding for local governments to create bike paths and other improvements like bike parking. So we actually had some wins on the funding front, but funding for transportation in Maryland is just disastrous. This session, it was last session, Governor Moore has grappled with this. The state legislature has grappled with it. They've brought new revenue sources online, but they've also made a lot of cuts. So our biggest ask for the next session is going to be improved funding situation by bringing appropriate revenues online in order to fund safety programs.
Bike and pedestrian safety advocate Seth Grimes, thank you.
Thanks, Sunil.
Going backward, that was bike and pedestrian safety advocate Seth Grimes. And before him, Mike Tidwell, Executive Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and Maryland Senator Charles Sydnor, speaking on different aspects of Governor Moore's bill vetoes. A political science takeaway from the discussion is about the process by which we traditionally seek change. The study, which precedes action, construction, and spending. Studies are a sword. You can use them for good and use them for bad. Several years back, when I tried to get the Montgomery County Department of Transportation to build one block of sidewalk to connect the walking route for about 20 school children, they came to study the traffic pattern and used it to kill the idea. In a rational system of government, studies provide empirical basis for even political action. Few things are more political than reparations. It's a moral question, no doubt, but also a central political fault line in America going back to the country's original sin. Charles Sydnor and the members of the Black Caucus in the Maryland General Assembly took the traditional path. Create the study, make that the empirical basis for action, and then hold the state accountable for delivering remedy. And not doing the study was the first step to inaction. They are going to override the veto, so whether there will be empirical basis for action is a moot point. And surely Governor Moore would have known that a veto override was forthcoming. Moore is not vulnerable in 2026 from the left. I cannot imagine environmentalists or Black Marylanders voting in large numbers for, say, Larry Hogan. He is not even vulnerable from the far right. He is most vulnerable from the moderate wings of the Republican and the Democratic parties. And it is that support which could sway because of decisions to do or not to do reparations and climate change studies. Worth emphasizing that the governor isn't abandoning advocates across the board. On pedestrian and bike safety, he remains with them.
When he cries, it's like a mouth.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the university's Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Susanna Laird, country folk singer-songwriter based in Frederick, Maryland. You can find her music on YouTube at Susanna Laird. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. It's Memorial Day weekend. Pools are opening. Sales are roaring. Have a good unofficial start to the summer.
When he smiles, the sparkle in his eyes plays a game with the lines on my cheek. And when he laughs, my crown feels firm and solid beneath my feet. My hand stretches out for his. It feels lonely on its own. We are still